All right, we are recording now, and I will go ahead and do just a quick little introduction of Dr. Jonathan Stuhlman. So thank you for joining us for our docent training. Jonathan Stuhlman has been the curator of American art at the Mint Museum since 2006. He previously held curatorial positions at the Norton Museum of Art, the University of Virginia Art Museum, the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, and the Art Institute of Chicago. And he has also organized numerous traveling exhibits and contributed to their accompanying catalogs, including one about Georgia O'Keeffe. Dr. Stuhlman received a BA with the honor of art history from, let's see if I can say this right, Bedoin College.
Close, Bowdoin.
Bowdoin, okay, Bowdoin College. I make up my own pronunciations. And an MA in modern and contemporary art history, theory, and criticism from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and a PhD in the history of art from the University of Virginia. And when he's not spending time with his wife and two boys, you'll find him deep in the woods on his mountain bike. So that sounds like fun. So if you all could welcome Dr. Stuhlman, and I will turn it over to him now, and I think he'll do a screen share.
Yeah, I will go for it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Let me find it. There we go. Slideshow. All right, can everyone see my screen? Should have some Mint buildings on there. I see some nodding. Okay, good. So I just thought I'd do a little bit of a background about the exhibition itself, and just a brief introduction to the Mint, and then we'll jump into the work, some of the works in the show. So just to give you a brief sense, Mint Museum has two buildings. It opened in 1936 in the building on the upper left there, in what was a former United States Mint building. We made printed money. It was the first such outside of Philadelphia. And the museum expanded twice in the 60s and then again in the 80s to its kind of current state you see on the left-hand side on the bottom. It's set in a park about 2 or 3 miles outside of downtown Charlotte. And in 2010, we opened a building in Uptown Charlotte, kind of in the little cluster of buildings called the Levine Center for the Arts. And so our building on the right is the new building. And that's where we house our American art collection, our modern and contemporary collections, and our collection of craft and design. Our other collections at Randolph Road include our decorative arts, our historic fashion, ancient American, and our small European paintings collection. And so we kind of jointly run these two facilities. Most of my time is spent at the new Uptown building. And so Under Construction followed a couple of exhibitions that we did where I really wanted to dig into our permanent collection a little bit and explore various aspects of it, and in particular works that didn't get out on view that often. As you all know, works on paper in particular are sensitive to light and have to get rotated fairly frequently. And like you, despite being a pretty good sized museum, we have a fairly small staff and we don't have a dedicated gallery for works on paper. So it's a lot of wear and tear on staff, kind of getting them in and out of the permanent collection rotations. And so I wanted to do some shows that really got, all of our holdings, or our best of the holdings of certain kinds of work out for people to see. And so we did a show in 2015, looking at works on paper. So prints, print watercolors, pastels, that sort of thing. And then we did photography the next year in 2016. So it was fun to get both of those out. And those got me thinking about what other mediums we had that would be interesting to focus on. And around this time, I also started overseeing our gallery dedicated to Romar Bearden. And so those things all kind of went into the idea for Under Construction, which here we see installed at the Mint. Now, Bearden is kind of an interesting artist for us. He was a Charlotte native. He was born here, lived here for a few years, and then his family, like many other African-American families in the early 20th century, migrated northwards, and he ended up living in New York. But he always came back. He always had relatives in the South and in Charlotte, and remained very much tied to the South. And a lot of his work that he did, his early paintings, but in particular his collages, which he started doing in earnest in the 1960s, focused back on themes of kind of everyday life in the South. And so on the right there, you can see him working in the studio, and the big photograph on the wall behind him is actually his parents sitting on the porch of their home in Charlotte. So even when he was working in a studio in New York late in life, he also had that reminder of Charlotte in the background. And so like you all have focused so much on your kind of your hometown hero, Buford Delaney recently. We have a gallery in our building dedicated, in our new building dedicated to works on by Bearden. And so we are very happy to lend our Buford Delaney painting to your recent show. That may look familiar to some of you. It was visiting, just came back. We're so happy to have it back because it's beautiful.
Dr. Stuhlman, I
Yes.
think your screen might be frozen because we're not seeing like the next slides. We're just seeing like your general PowerPoint screen.
Oh no, you're not seeing the Delaney?
No, we can see like your setup screen.
You may just want to
But
stop
it's not
sharing.
actually
and then-
playing the PowerPoint.
Yeah, you may just want to stop sharing and then start sharing again, and that might fix it.
I'll try that. Hang on. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thanks for letting me know. Let's see. So share, do that. Okay.
Maybe if you start the PowerPoint again.
Is it changing now?
Yes.
Okay. You're seeing like my full.
Yeah, we're seeing like the side panel that shows the next slide coming up.
It's weird. This is the first time when I've used PowerPoint and done this and opened it, and it opened up into a different window. When I did that.
Oh,
I may just leave it like this to make sure you can see everything.
that's okay.
With everyone. It won't be quite as big, but at least it's working.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So sorry about that.
That's okay.
Here's a quick works on paper show, our photography show. And then under construction as it was here. And then the image of Bearden and him working in his studio with the photograph of his parents in the background there on the porch of their home in Charlotte. So those are the things that I mentioned, nothing too critical, image-wise you're missing. And then Delaney. Now you can see it. And hopefully you'll remember our painting from your recent show. So, and here's our gallery we keep dedicated to Bearden. So it was thinking about both how to kind of explore, we rotate our Bearden gallery about once a year and look at different themes in his work or different aspects of it. And I had just done a show that was looking at kind of Bearden beyond collage around the time I was thinking about the collage show, thinking about all the different other mediums that he used, his printmaking, his drawings, his paintings. And so the kind of the intersection of those two things led me to start thinking about the medium of collage. And I started really looking across, just kind of digging around in storage and thinking about kind of the impact that Bearden had on kind of collage's broader acceptance as a kind of viable medium for contemporary artists. And as I started looking across our collection, I realized kind of how many works in the collection incorporated some aspect of collage. And so I just started thinking about, how did collage impact photography? How does the art of assemblage relate back to it? What are the different ways artists use collage? And so checklist started coming together that way. And so it was almost exclusively drawn from our own permanent collection. And I'm sure some of you have dug into the history of collage a little bit, but just as a little bit of a refresher, collage was a kind of way of working that had been around for centuries prior to the 20th century, but really kind of was reborn as kind of acceptable form of avant-garde artistic practice in the early 20th century with Picasso and Braque and the Cubists. And they were interested in kind of bringing together different elements from different parts of everyday life. So in the Braque on the left there, you can see bits of newspaper, you can see some cardboard, you can see kind of painting and drawing worked in, scraps of paper, all brought together as they were looking for ways to kind of break up the way that they represented the world around them. now slightly after the Cubists were working with collage, the Dada artists like Hannah Hook, whose picture you see on the right there, and you're not going to be able to see it as much because my screen view is cutting me off. Maybe I can, there. Artists who are working as part of the Dada movement in the late 19-teens and early 1920s embraced collage for the way in which they felt like it could kind of disrupt the way that we were used to seeing the world represented in art, and kind of access kind of the chaotic aspect of life in post-World War I Europe, and really be disruptive. I mean, the whole point was to kind of disrupt the ways that we perceived art. And the Surrealists coming after them picked up on that as well. So collage kind of started to work its way into different ways that artists were exploring how to actually make art in the early 20th century, and it kind of kept going to some extent into the 30s and 40s. But it wasn't really until the 1960s when Bearden started experimenting with it that he took a hold of it and really kind of repopularized it, I would say, became really well known for it. And you started to see it popping up again in pop art and other forms of art well into the 80s and up to today. But Bearden really liked collage, I think, also for the kind of the narrative aspects of it, not just the ways that he could play with abstraction and breaking up the picture plane and those kinds of things, but the ways he could bring images together from all different sources to really look back on everyday life and his own experiences and to create narratives with it. So that was really kind of my jumping off point for the first section of the show, which I called New Narratives, was looking at different ways in which artists were kind of working in Bearden's tradition to kind of find different ways of creating narratives in their work and telling stories. And Bearden, of course, we tried to work pieces by Bearden. You'll see his impact in many different parts of the show, and some that you might not even have expected. But in the new narratives, there will be a number of works by him. One of the best known is Evening of the Gray Cat, and this is it's a great one to really look closely at with groups and get them thinking about all of the different ways that Bearden was, all the different techniques and ways of creating collage that he was using. And so in this one, you can see, he's not just kind of cutting out a figure from a newspaper or magazine wholesale and inserting it into the composition. He's building up the figures and the different elements of the scene in lots of different ways. So if you look at a couple of details, you can see on the left, sometimes he's just using pieces of colored paper that he's cutting into the shapes of things. So the red scarf, that man's black hat, even the silhouette of his face, his green suit. I mean, all of those are really just pieces of colored paper that are cut into the shapes of the objects that they're representing. He would also do things like bringing in paper that has patterns on it. So for the picture there on the table, it's this kind of splattered paint that makes it look like a decorated picture. Sometimes he brings in bits of patterned paper to represent something that might have a pattern on it. So looking at the rug on the floor, for example, you're getting kind of a patterned rug made up from a piece of patterned paper. Sometimes the object is actually itself. So on the shelf above the woman there's a brush that's just a brush, shoe brush or bristle brush that he's snipped from a magazine somewhere. And then sometimes he's gone back in and kind of painted on things to give them texture and detail, like the watermelon, the seeds are all painted on there, or the pattern on the woman's shirt. So he's really bringing together many, many, many different ways of decorating and making his collages. Here you can see the whole scene, and another fun thing to do with kids especially is to say, so what do you think the title of this painting is? When you tell them it's Evening of the Gray Cat, then they have to find the gray cat, which is down there, circled it on the lower right-hand side of the composition, tucked in there, sitting up on a table. So this is a fun one to really kind of start with, really exploring all the different ways that artists make collage. And as you go through the show, you'll see there are some pieces by Bearden where they're much more painterly. In the collage, you really have to kind of look for it. They become even more abstract. There's an early morning scene by candlelight where it's an early collage and there's a lot more painting going on than actual collage. The collage is worked in very, very subtly, as opposed to this one where it's much more obvious. So beyond this, there are many works by other contemporary artists in this part of the show. Here's one of the pieces by Howardina Pindell called Autobiography, East West Gardens. And so this was done when Pindell was able to get away from the US for a bit. She was finding it, much like Buford Delaney actually, as a Black woman working in New York in the 70s and 80s, kind of butting up against discrimination. And she wanted to kind of escape and was able to travel to Japan and other parts of the world for a while. And so this is actually made up of that. That's what gives the series its title, East West. And this one is East West Gardens. And you can, and that references the fact that one of the places she loved going in Japan were the gardens, the Japanese gardens. She really found peace and respite there. But this is made up of lots of postcards that she gathered during her trip that are all collaged together into this very dynamic, really kind of abstract composition. But once you look closely, you'll see that little bits of the places, different places she traveled on her trip to the East. There's a very large collage in the exhibition by contemporary artist Nils Karsten. So you can see it on the left there in this screenshot from one of the installations of the show. And Karsten really comes at collage from more of the surrealist tradition, kind of creating these kind of fantastical images that would seem to come from a dream or a nightmare or your subconscious. So bringing together lots of different painted and collaged elements in his work. His background is German, and I think you can see a little bit of the collages, early collages of Max Ernst in his work, even the figure. So this is a spread on the right there of a book of collages that Ernst produced, and you can see this figure on the right running in with the head of a bird, and you can see in Karsten's big collage there a figure with the head of a bird as well. But really drawing on the power of bringing disparate images together to kind of create new hybrid beings and spaces is what drives a lot of Karsten's art. And he was really great. He shared with us some of his process images for when he was making this piece. And the title of it is called Ausbruch der Doofen, which translates roughly to outbreak of idiocy. So he's really kind of trying to get at that chaotic nature. And so this is what he started with in his studio. This kind of funny figure of kind of the infant face and the female body, what was probably once bending over and tying her shoes, kind of now falling through space with a cowboy hat on its head. And he started painting some wings on it. The figures down below reaching up. And he keeps like a whole stockpile of little images in his studio that he uses and works into his art. So you can see in the next image, he's starting to kind of surround that figure with a cosmos of other smaller collaged pieces and starting to paint in some more of the ground. They're going back in, painting out some of the swirling collage bits and leaving some in. Then doing more, kind of changing it up a bit so the figure's not even falling anymore, but kind of now kind of floating up there with its wings, and face becomes kind of more skeletal. And then him standing, you get a sense of the scale of it, and then the final piece. So it's always fun to share those kind of process images. We have another set of those later on. And then the final piece in the show, or in this section that I'll share with you, actually wasn't even part of our collection at the time that we did under construction. It was something that our director and I were at the Armory Art Fair in New York, maybe a year later, and went into this booth and saw this really incredible piece by Nigerian/British artist Ndidi Emefiele called Blow Dry Salon that she did in 2018. And so this is another one where you really have to get up close to it and look at how all the different elements are collaged in. There's fabrics, there's compact discs that are actually the eyes of two of the figures. There's textiles, there's other collaged bits that are all worked in there, photographs. And then painting that ranges from more realistic to also very abstract, as you can see in that kind of misty figure on the left-hand side. But we liked the way in which this kind of continues on in the tradition of Bearden of kind of telling stories of contemporary life, of people gathering, and of using kind of the technique of collage in innovative ways, and shows how it's kind of both ongoing and global. And Emefiele here is celebrating salons, which in Nigeria are one of the few women-owned businesses. So they're not only places for women to gather, but also a source of kind of economic mobility for women in some African cultures. And so we decided to offer it as part of the show when it traveled, because it seemed like a really nice fit. So one of the other sections of the show looks at collage and the idea of abstraction, and those aren't things that we would think normally kind of go together very well, but a lot of artists use collage when they're exploring different aspects of abstraction. And the interesting thing is, and it's not that well known, although as Romar Bearden's work gets to be more studied, we start to see a little bit more. Bearden actually had a period in the late 50s and early 60s when he experimented with abstraction. It was right as he was starting to explore collage as well. And so the piece on the left there is just simply titled Abstraction from 1961. But what I think this reveals is that the depth of Bearden's scholarship of art history. Bearden wasn't making art in a vacuum. Like many artists, he knew very well what came before him and was drawing on a lot of different influences on his work. And I think this pulls on a couple of different aspects, both of earlier art and art that was going on at that time. In terms of the palette and even parts of the structure of the piece, I think you can get a sense that he's looking back to classic Cubist collages. So I put up Pablo Picasso's Glass Guitar and Bottle as a comparison there. So that palette of whites and grays and blacks and browns is very much a Cubist palette. And I think you can even get a sense with some of the kind of horizontal, rectangular forms, some of the linear elements, that he's also looking kind of structurally at how the Cubists created their collages, both flattening space and abstracting it. The other tradition he's looking at here is a more current tradition of abstraction, thinking about abstract expressionism. So again, a comparison on the right here, Jackson Pollock's 1948, one of his early drip paintings from the Museum of Modern Art. If you look at the surface of Bearden's collage, there's a lot of gestural paint application to it, or ink application. And so the surface itself has not just that kind of more geometric structure from Cubism, but kind of a layered on energy from abstract expressionism on top of that. And one of the things I love about this piece, and it's hard to see, this is one you have to kind of see in person, but if you look at the lower right-hand corner of this collage, there's a little strip of red. And I've kind of done a detail of it, and it's the image is a little bit cropped, so it's actually a little bit more red in person. But I think even with that, he's kind of breaking up or relieving the monotony of the browns and whites and blacks with this little pop of red. And if you took it out, his work would be a lot duller. It wouldn't have that kind of tension that the red adds to it. And I think he's looking back. There's a tradition in both British and American landscape painting and French landscape painting as well, from the late 18th and early 19th centuries, of putting that little red figure into the foreground of a painting. So here's one of Thomas Gainsborough's landscapes with the figure in the foreground on the right there in red circled. And it gives the viewer a little something to associate with. It draws your eye to the figure. It kind of places you into the landscape. Now, I don't have hard evidence that Bearden's directly referencing this, but I think it's likely based on his knowledge of kind of art history that he's kind of calling that to mind by including that little bit of red into this abstract collage. There are a few things you'll notice in the show that are not necessarily collages themselves, but that relate to collage or call on the aesthetic of collage for their work. And one of them is the series by the American artist Man Ray, who is associated with the Dada artists and the Surrealists in Paris in the 20s and 30s. He did a very well-received series of collages in the 1920s called Revolving Doors. And he actually originally displayed the series in Peggy Guggenheim's gallery. As was recreated on the right there, this is not something we did, but another museum had done. He displayed them so that viewers would originally be able to spin them around, and the images would kind of flicker back and forth in front of you. Unfortunately, the series was lost in the 1920s, presumably destroyed. But they were so well received that he did a whole series of prints that were based on them. And so we were fortunate to have one of those series. So you'll see prints from Revolving Doors that I think really, like the one on the left there, that really maintain that feeling of collage, of layers of color placed on top of each other to create different effects. They kind of hover between representation and abstraction. The one on the left there, for example, is called The Meeting. Now you're not seeing kind of two figures necessarily meeting, but you are seeing kind of different forms and colors coming together and interacting with each other. So kind of the red and the yellow coming together to make the oranges, the yellow and the blues coming together to make the green. So you are getting this sense of kind of things coming together, meetings that are happening. And the titles are often good guides to those kind of the references in the works themselves. There are more recent kind of pure abstractions, not super recent, but Esteban Vicente, who was a kind of second generation abstract expressionist painter, went to Hawaii and did a series of just big, beautiful, lush collages there that call upon the kind of tropical feeling of the light and the atmosphere and the plants that he was experiencing there. This is one that you can just, it just glows when you see it in person. So you'll look forward to getting a chance to see that. And then we included a local Charlotte artist in our show, whose work I'm fascinated by, Felicia von Bork. So there, I think you're showing two of the works by her, and it's these two. But she does an interesting technique where she actually creates monotypes in her studio, and which are absolutely beautiful in and of themselves. And then she cuts them up and recombines them to create collages. So the one on the left, which is part of our collection, is called How to Mine the Past. And you get a sense when you look at it of almost kind of buildings in the background there. And one of them being kind of exploding or blowing up. Maybe it's mining is going on within it. And she talks about it as this sense of kind of looking back to your past and digging through things to find inspiration for the future. And she did this whole series called How to blank ... So on the right is How to Elope. And that's actually, as she talks about it, she keeps a little notebook of color studies. So when she's out and about during her day, she sees colors that she finds fascinating, and she kind of puts them in this little notebook. And here she talks about how it's this little notebook almost flying out through a window into the beyond. And so that sense of eloping or escaping, or running off, she's kind of capturing that in this one. But so I have a couple of process shots of her. So here's a monotype that she's in the process of printing on the left there. And then you can see her studio floor with all of the monotypes laid out there for her to pick and choose from and cut up. Then on the left, one of the pieces kind of coming together and her working in her studio, cutting them up. So it's always, again, I love seeing these kind of artist process shots. I'm glad you're recording it so you can share it with others. Another thing that kind of carries on in collage is the use of text, which is kind of a fascinating way of bringing the everyday world into a work of art in a kind of literal way. And so you can see on the left again, Hannah Hoch doing that in her piece we saw earlier, with even the word Dada text in there, put in there a couple of times, especially on the lower right and the upper left. And then George Brock in his Still Life with Tenora, again, seeing that piece of newspaper brought in there. So it's kind of tying viewers back to things from everyday life within the work of art. And so we see that in a number of works in our collection. We have an interesting collage by Lauren McKeever, who was an abstract expressionist painter in the late 50s and early 60s. She actually spent some time in Paris and created this work there, which is kind of unusual for her. And you can see it's all made of collage bits of newspaper from her time in Paris. And it's called La Rue Mouffetard, which is the street in Paris that her studio is on. And so I think what we're looking at, it's a big vertical piece. And straight up the center, you can see it's a little bit sparer. There are not a lot of color and colored bits collaged. And I think that's meant to represent the street. And then when you look along each side of it, there's little bits that represent, I think, that stand in for kind of the different things that existed along the street that she was on. So on the detail there on the right, there's a little bouquet of flowers. So perhaps there was a florist along the street, but all of that text is tying it back to her experience in Paris and seeing the newspapers there and that kind of thing. One piece on the show that's really fun to dig into is by the contemporary artist Ken Aptekar. So we invited Aptekar to come to Charlotte in 2008 or 9 to create a new work of art when we were opening our new building. Now, two of the most iconic pieces in the Mint Museum's collection are the ones that kind of every school kid knows. We have versions of Alan Ramsey's portraits, coronation portraits of Queen Charlotte and King George. And Queen Charlotte is who our city is named for, and we're in Mecklenburg County, and she was Charlotte of Mecklenburg. So very much tied to our region, but these pieces always kind of live in our historic building at Randolph Road. And so we wanted to create something kind of a contemporary bridge to our new building. And so Ken Aptekar came in and created this work of art for us. It's 6 panels that are painted in the background, and then there is sandblasted glass with text that sits on top of them. So you're getting this layering of image and text. And so what he kind of wanted to do, this was a time when Queen Charlotte and her background were of great interest in her kind of mixed racial background. And there was a lot of debate about kind of what that, kind of what that meant. And that kind of came up again with the, I'm going to forget the name of it, the recent Netflix series that focused on that period in British culture. It'll come to me in a minute. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. It was very much kind of in the news again in the past year or so with Queen Charlotte. But so what Ken did was he interviewed people, all different people from all different parts of Charlotte, kind of what their thoughts were about Queen Charlotte, how they identified with her or identified her, what their favorite details of the paintings were. And then he took bits of text from those interviews and layered them over some of the details of the painting. So you can see on the upper left one, the text is black, white, other. On the right is immigrant, which was interesting. She was an immigrant into Great Britain when she was made queen. On the lower left there, queen of the enemy, referencing the fact she was queen of Britain during the Revolutionary War. So just, I think there's a lot to dig into with that particular portrait with visitors. Another piece with text, where text makes up the background, is this large work by Tim Rollins called America 9. America refers to Franz Kafka's book, America. And Tim Rollins worked collaboratively with student groups, at first in New York and then all over the country, to kind of work with children to create his works of art. So they're really the products of his interactions with them and getting them to think about great works of literature in particular. And so we had the students read Kafka in America. And in chapter 9, there's a text about kind of what golden horn your voice would be. And so we had the students think about what form that would look like, and then worked with them to paint images that were interesting to them on top of the text of the book. And so here you can see him actually working with some of the students on the piece here in Charlotte. So yeah, there are a number of works that incorporate text into them. There's another section of the show on photography. That's photography isn't something we usually think of as in relationship with collage. We think of photography as kind of this direct one-to-one, you take a picture and that's what you got. But artists certainly used it as a medium to start with for their collages. There are a number of works in the show by Christina Rogers, who was a local photographer. And she used kind of collage photography in a number of different ways in her work. So on the left there, it's a scene that she made in New York, looking out of her window, but taking lots of small pictures and kind of recombining them back into one large composite scene. So that's kind of a literal, just kind of using the collage, the photographs to recreate the scene in kind of a fragmented way. And on the right, you can see both incorporating pictures from her own family history into the work, as well as, I see her using collage. She would kind of layer negatives on top of each other and then print them out. So the collaging is happening in that sense as part of the process of producing a single image, as opposed to kind of cutting and pasting one on top of the other. But that kind of layering to produce something new, I think, is intrinsic to the idea of collage. So she was experimenting in a bunch of different ways with that. You can also look at collage in the digital age. And I think a lot of artists are using programs like Photoshop and others to kind of recombine images and create something new in different ways. So the Italian artist Loris Ticini here, in his large piece called Lost in Steps, Green Powder Pepperscape, kind of combined, he took images of people on the streets from his travels, and then would set up landscapes in his studio. So in this case, he set up a landscape on his desktop of peppercorns and soap bubbles, and then photographed it, and then in Photoshop combined and reduced, enlarged the scale of the little landscape with peppercorns, reduced the scale of the figures from the street, isolated them from the street, and then kind of combined them together into this kind of surreal landscape where you get these, the father with the boy on his back walking through this kind of amazing landscape. And you'll see in person, he even went a step further. He took a piece of plexiglass and kind of heated it up and bubbled it, and it sits in front of the photograph, kind of adding to that bubbly effect of the image itself. So it's kind of collage in a couple of different ways. And then again, a more abstract digital collage by a local artist, Marek Reynes. Marek is Polish in his background. And so in this image on the left there, he's taken an image of his one of the cities in his native state of Poland, and a city that was bombed during World War II, and taken an aerial photograph of it there as one layer. And then he's taken an abstracted image of one of his sculptures, which we see one of on the right there. They're not in the show, but just to give you a sense of the source, and kind of abstracted it and layered it on top there. So you almost get the sense of a bomb being dropped on top of the city there. His sculpture on the right is actually, if you were to see it in person, it's a bust of Napoleon on the top part of the black, and the bottom part of the black is meant to be kind of an iceberg, the lower part of an iceberg that you don't see. So he's interested in kind of ideas of colonialism and conquest, and sometimes one figure is just kind of the representative of the menace lurking underneath. So that kind of comes together into this big digital photograph of his. A couple more sections, and then I'll open up for questions from people. I also wanted to explore the relationship of collage, artists that use collage, and how they used other media, and it related to that. So one great example of that is Romar Bearden's piece, The Train from 1974. On the left is kind of the pure collage of it, where he's bringing together black and white images, colored imagery into this image of a family gathered together in an interior in front of a table, eating together with the train in the background seen through a window, which appears in a lot of his work. And so he took this image and started playing with it in his printmaking. And he really loved to explore all different kinds of printmaking. So you can see in the first one of the variants of the print on the right there, he's kind of taken the image and flipped the blacks and whites, flipped the positives and negatives, and also kind of graded the color slightly. So you've kind of got it going from that bluish down the lower part, kind of an aqua color, up through reds and pinks in the upper part. So he's starting to really push it more towards abstraction. And then he takes it even further in the second version of the piece in the show, also called The Train, where he's eliminated the whites entirely and really gone for just yellows and greens and a little bit of lavender. If you look at it closely in person, you can still make out the figures, but he's pushed it so far towards abstraction through the printmaking process that it's become something entirely different. But these are all kind of rooted in his collage practice and seeing what he could do with it beyond collage. There are also two pieces in the show by Annie Lemansky, who's a North Carolina artist who does paintings, collage, sculpture, all kinds of things. She did a series of collages that were based on kind of the early kids' encyclopedias of science and math, these illustrated encyclopedias that she remembered from her youth. And she found a set and kind of cut them up and made a small collage you see there on the left, which is in the show, out of it. And she loved the effect of that small collage. And so she made it as a print as well. And you can see the print, it's kind of blocked by the form of the sculpture there. This was in a show she did. There's a large print she made of the collage in the background there. So she wanted to see what happened when she took this smaller scale collage that she made and blew it up into a larger scale as a print. And I think you'll agree when you see it in person, she's really managed to retain a lot of the qualities of the collage in the print. I mean, you can really, it almost feels like a large collage. She's maintained kind of the heavy black outlines around the edges of things. And so it's interesting to notice how she's tried to maintain that effect in the works of art in the show. And then finally, Ruca Maria Toro's large painting, Invisible Life of Small Things. This is not a collage piece, but she very much draws on the aesthetic of collage for her paintings. And she actually does practice collage. We weren't able to send any of them down with the show, but she does do collages. It's kind of studies and together thinking. So this is a piece that's very autobiographical. She made it at a time when she was transitioning from having lived in Florida to having moved up to upstate New York, and is always interested in the natural world. And so she's kind of capturing all of the different flora and fauna that she'd seen. And so when she was in Florida, she went scuba diving for the first time. And so you've got an octopus down there in the lower left. And then I think when she was in upstate New York, she was interested in all of the different, the rabbits and other creatures that she was seeing up there that she didn't see in Florida. So you see bunnies hopping all around. She had just married her husband. And if you look at the figure in the center there, her kind of floating in the space, above her back and legs, you'll see these two kind of coiled forms of two snakes, and they represent her and her husband as well, kind of coming together in harmony with each other. And then she said, I put in this weird geometric structure floating above my head, and I didn't know why I wanted it there at first. And then she realized that it was at a time when she and her husband were building a house together when they had made their move. And so she said, oh gosh, it's from seeing all of those boards and beams and things under construction. And so that's kind of floating above her head. But this is a really fun piece to look at with kids as well. There's lots of other animals and things hidden in there to find with them. But she's really drawing on that, the layered technique she explores in her collages, layering things on top of each other, patterns and animals and things to create this dense composition. Oh, and then two more pieces by Sam Gilliam. These can almost float between other medium and abstraction. They kind of occupy both territories, but we know Sam Gilliam for his wonderful stained hanging works that he pioneered in the 60s and 70s. But he also explored collage a fair amount in his work. And so the painting on the left there, lots of different textures and patterns and samples all layered on top of each other to create the kind of abstract space of the work. And originally the piece, it's kind of a double collage. The little chunk on the lower left-hand or right-hand corner that you see there with kind of the angled edge right here, that was not originally part of the piece when he created it in 1982. We commissioned him to do a piece for the atrium of our original building. And he came and he actually brought that and added it on in the early 2000s when he was doing our atrium installation. So he collaged onto his original collage. And then in the more recent piece on the right, to Little Miss Cole, the references to his friend and fellow artist Kevin Cole and Kevin Cole's daughter. This piece incorporates lots of mirrors into the work, as well as lots of painted cut and paper. So you can get a sense of that. It's very three-dimensional in person. Let's see, and then a final section here on assemblage, just a small section, kind of bringing collage into 3 dimensions. And this was something that the Cubists experimented with. You can see Picasso doing it in one of his Cubist sculptures, Guitar, from 1914. And Joseph Cornell, who's probably one of the best known practitioners of collage and assemblage outside of Bearden, who's associated with the Surrealists in his boxes that he made. So here's one of the great habitats that he did, Habitat for a Shooting Gallery from 1948. Unfortunately, we don't have a Cornell in our collection. I wish we did, but we do have another number of other pieces that are in the show, like the Joe Brainerd on the left there, the Radcliffe Bailey, it's a really powerful piece called Middle Passage that references passage of slave trade from Africa to America and how brutal that often was. And then one final piece, which we actually commissioned for the show by Sheila Gallagher. Sheila is an artist who works in Massachusetts. And we had a piece of hers in an earlier exhibition group show of kind of looking at different trends in contemporary art. And her work was so popular with our visitors that we decided we would commission something for under construction. So what Sheila does is she literally melts objects from everyday life that she finds in recycling bins. She started scavenging recycling bins from the alley behind her apartment in the Boston area and using them to make works of art. So in this one in particular, one detail you can see here is like I'm moving it now, sorry. Here's like a little slide flute. There's beads worked in here. And I will show you how she makes these amazing things as well. And this could almost, again, float in many different sections of the show. It's kind of abstract. There's some text in it. So it kind of occupies a lot of interesting spaces. This is the piece. This is the piece that inspired us to create or to commission ours that was in a different show. Here's the one that's in your show that we commissioned called Ghost Orchid Plastic Nebula. And so she became interested, Sheila did, in endangered species and rare species and orchids in particular, and kind of that relationship between the environmental impacts of plastic. And she was she kind of taking things that people were recycling anyway, but she was giving them new life in her art. So kind of the interaction between kind of recycling and the ecosystem and endangered species. So if you look throughout this piece, there are lots of different, all kinds of different orchids and other rare and endangered plants that are kind of scattered throughout it. And she liked the kind of this, almost the cosmos-like feel that she got when she did that. And so that's where you get the nebula in the title. So here are some of her bins of things that she collects as she scavenges. She kind of sometimes sorts them by color. So she has a palette that she's using. So she'll kind of, you can see there are pill bottles, yogurt containers, lids, little balls, all kinds of things that she finds. And here's some text. I mean, she'll snip letters out from things to spell out different words and bits of text in her pieces. Here's some of the images of ghost orchids and other flowers that she was looking at as she was creating her compositions. So she sent those to me. And here you can see she's starting to lay out the different bits of plastic into the forms that they'll ultimately take and starting to melt them together. And here's text. You can see yellow and purple words that are in there. And then here she is. She literally grills them. She puts them on big sheets and grills them on a high temperature grill in her studio. And she has learned that different things melt at different points. So some things will become more, the plastics that are not as thick or made differently will melt at different temperatures. So some things become more liquidy and fluid. Some things maintain their shape but kind of meld together. And then you can see she kind of lays it all out there on the floor of her studio, sheet by sheet. You can see here some that are complete off the sheets and some that are getting ready to go in to be toasted. And then puts them all together into the final composition. Then she kind of melts each of the sheets together. So it's, kind of fragile. They're mounted in an armature, but really fun, again, to look at with kids and grown-ups too. And you can even find cut up bits of the credit card from the gallery that represents her in the piece, if you know where to look. So there's all kinds of fun things worked in there. So I'll stop talking now. I will encourage you and your visitors to look closely as you go through the show, because there's always lots of little details. And I put this Kojo Griffin painting up here as an example of that. This is a piece I walked by. It had been in the gallery since I've been at the museum. I walked by it in storage a bunch of times, but it was only when I really started looking at works in the collection through the lens of collage that I realized that some of the elements here are very exquisitely carefully collaged in. So at first I thought this was just a pure painting. When you look, I think the turtles and even the figure itself are all collaged on top of the background. So that's why I end with look closely, because you always find something new, even if you think you've seen it before, and really enjoy. I mean, I think there's a lot of fun things to dig into with the show. And with that, I will stop talking. I guess I'll leave the screen share. Maybe I'll open back up this pane so I can see if people ask me questions. And yeah, open it up if people have any questions about specific works in the show or anything else. I'm happy to answer.
Well, I'm really glad you showed us pictures of how the melted plastic piece was put together, because we had a lot of questions about that. Yeah. And I would have found that on my own.
Yeah, I will send you, I can send you a copy of my PowerPoint, and that way you can print them out if doesn't want to show them to people in the galleries, or if you have, I don't know if you have iPads you bring in sometimes or what, but yeah, it's definitely interesting for people to kind of see how those are made.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Just being able to share those pictures, I think, would really give people a concept of how it is created. Yeah. Anybody else have questions? Go ahead and unmute yourselves and we'll start a conversation.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that you all kept, because I know I looked at the text panels and things, that you all kept roughly the sections that we had. So things should be kind of organized roughly in that way. And like I said, some things might float depending on how they're interpreted, but I thought it gave just a nice way to really explore all the different aspects of collage and get people thinking about it. I mean, it's, it's such a common part of our visual environment nowadays, especially with digital media, that we don't really think about it that much. This was just a fun way to kind of pull it apart and give people some framework.
I really like this show. I was trying to think if there was anything I was trying to figure out.
And I think there's more. I think if you look on the Mint YouTube channel, or maybe search Apticar, there may be more about the Charlotte piece, because there's a
Okay.
lot that's interesting to dig into. I know we have like an interview with the artist that we did.
Okay, that would be great, because that was another one I was curious about the background of a little more. I have a little blog for the docents where I share a lot of articles and stuff, so I can probably share it there. And
And I wonder, I should try to find, maybe I'll have our librarian forward me a link. We usually do, our library team usually does, we call it our Mint Wiki page, where she pulls up kind of resources on, or information on each of the artists in each particular show. And it is a kind of a great resource. I know our docents use it. So let me make a note to forward you the link to that too.
thank you.
I have a quick question. I can't see myself, which is a little disorienting, but anyway, I'll
There
go
you are.
forward. I'm interested in the Nils Karsten piece. If I understood it as I was looking through the process,
Yeah.
that image of the little girl
Mhm.
essentially gets lost underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to confirm that. That's actually, I mean, it makes the process pieces like actually pretty important in understanding the piece, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think for him, maybe like that sense of her kind of tumbling, taking figure that I think at first was someone leaning over and tying their shoe or buckling their shoe, putting it upside down so that she's kind of either falling through space or tumbling. I think that kind of, the wing went on, you could see he did the wing to kind of have her
Yeah.
in space. And I think that, that kind of drove ultimately the winged figure floating there, but it's the original source is completely gone, like you said.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing the visual there, but thank you.
No, it is, I think pretty much gone, but that's, I love how things are made. And so that's why I'll try to get, if I can, from artists, get those process.
Yeah.
'Cause I love it.
Especially something like collage,
Yeah.
where the things will look very different as new things get layered on. So
Right. Or even the
yeah.
fact that, you could see that he added in all of those little bits around the figure and then painted half of them out.
Yeah. Don't they say of old paintings that oftentimes they'll reuse canvases and I mean this isn't just unique to collage, but it has a particular effect in collage.
No, I mean, you will see that sometimes a canvas will get flipped over, or you can see what's called in older paintings pentimenti, where an artist has made a later change, and over time that what's beneath kind of shows through a little bit as the paint layer fades a bit, or you can see outlines of ridges of paint underneath. So yeah, I mean, it's the artist, and that's, unless you're doing something like a silver point or just a straight up drawing, you can erase, I guess, but always some part of things changing as art evolves.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I personally can't wait to see this exhibit when it opens. I wish I had known more about it going into today, but I'm learning, and we'll see it. It looks fascinating. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot to really dig into there once you see it in person.
Any other questions y'all can think of? You've got the expert on the line right now.
Well, like I said at the beginning, if you have any questions, certainly send them along, forward them to me, and I'm happy to answer them. If you think of things as you're looking more.
Did you tell us who Tim Rollins was working with? What group of students?
Oh gosh.
Oh, it's the
was a-
KOS.
Yeah,
What's
KOS stands for that stands for Kids of Survival. That was just kind of the name of that he gave to the kids that he worked with in different places. I mean, it was middle school students, I think, here in Charlotte. I don't know which particular, I should probably know which particular school they were from, but so he was working with, he would come here and work with local students.
Okay.
And
They looked
typically
older than middle school.
maybe they were early high school.
The one photograph looked
Yeah.
older than middle school to me.
It might
but,
have been high school. I guess you probably wouldn't read Kafka until high school, right?
Yeah.
Having a middle, now that I reflect on that, having a middle schooler and a high schooler at home. Yeah, maybe it was high school, but I think it was typically students who, might not have come to the Mint or been involved with art previously. I think he would tend to work with, economically disadvantaged students.
Fantastic. That adds a whole nother layer of understanding to it too.
Yeah, so I like that with that and the Ken Aptekar, the Charlotte, that both of those were really communally, they're made in a communal sort of way with input from our community, which is, they have a lot of meaning for us here in Charlotte. But I think that way of making art, it's not just always the artists alone in their studio, but drawing input from community members in that kind of act of creation is it's a fascinating way to produce work.
A quick question, but it could be answered quickly rather than long, but I imagine there's a long answer as well. You mentioned when talking about that, the printmaking process that is a part of the layering of that train piece, that Bearden, did some printmaking. And I'm wondering, I know that he did other forms of art. It looks to be quite eclectic, but I wondered if, just briefly, what other kind of stuff do you have in your collection?
So we have everything from really early linoleum cut prints that he made, which are really fun because we actually have the linoleum blocks themselves, and we can show them next to the prints to show that reversal that happens when you make a print. So he did a lot of lithographs, silk screens, paintings, drawings, watercolors, and then worked a lot of those into his collages, those different techniques.
Yeah, I wondered if he was known in particular for printmaking, and you seem to confirm that.
Yes, yeah.
And I find and the lithographs and that kind of thing. That's
he even did
very physical act of creating a piece of art.
Yeah, he even did more experimental things. And I don't know if we have in our collection, but we are a couple of local collectors that have examples of his colotypes, which he would basically do with glue and then print with and take the print from the glue substrate.
Interesting.
The glue would dry, of course, but kind of using that as the negative space in his work. Or even I'm trying to think. Oh, he also used early Xerox machines and enlargements really early on in his work. So yeah. He was really experimental.
Yeah.
But I love the way that he takes that image and just through the simple act of playing with positives and negatives and contrast and color shift makes it almost completely abstract. It's fun.
Yeah. And then I really like the palette of the middle one. I really like the colors there.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to, like everyone else said, I'm excited to see it in person.
Yep.
I think the whole standing in front of it and seeing the three, the progression between them is just phenomenal. It'd be great.
And actually our collage is based on one from about a decade earlier of the exact same subject, but done in black and white.
Wow.
Even we don't have it, but in our collection, but so there, he's always kind of riffing on himself.
Yeah. Interesting.
Great. Well, thank you all for listening in. I hope that you will be able to have tour groups and bring them through.
Yeah.
We do too.
Yeah. I know we reopened last September and we haven't been doing a lot of tours, but definitely people have been coming. I'm kind of always amazed by how many people there are in the building, which is nice to see. So hopefully you're having people coming too, but I do hope as we all do, we can get back to some tours.
Yeah, right now we're kind of taking them on an individual basis
Yeah.
for small groups, and
Yeah.
we're getting requests in, and then I'm
Good.
starting to get school groups requesting for next spring. So they're kind of
Good.
planning way ahead,
Yeah.
but
Well, fingers crossed.
we should have some, and we can kind of dip our toe in and practice with this exhibition, I'm hoping.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.